already the 20th of March 2020, after midnight. The new day has begun, and I'm ready with the fourth part of the speech. So let me present it. Ladies and gentlemen, the last part of my great royal speech, unless I decide to wind up with still another. My identity changed in 2013 when I established my own city, the royal capital city of Agripolis, which was the beginning of a new creation in my life. The creation becoming my life, the noble kingdom. I was withdrawing from the world outside, the world created by politicians. For I believe this is where it all starts, a sanction. I believe the head is responsible for all that happens in the country. That makes the head symbolic of the country, the values representative of the country, the ways, the practice of the country, and so on. Of course, I know there are opposing and subversive forces or arms. Nonetheless, the head is all important. The head is the ruling culture and the direction for future. My queendom is simple, for so far there have been no people creating it with me. There have been inspiring presences, helpful presences, destructive presences, and finally the presence of the enemy, the siege, occupation, devastation, and gradual annihilation. Still, I am the only person in the kingdom, even if there appear guests, most of them uninvited, or downright intruders. Normally, countries, states, act in a totally different context. Obvious. On the 10th of April 2010, the Polish plane flight to Russia, specifically to Smoleńsk, to commemorate the Katyn massacre. There were 96 representatives of the Polish elite, including the President of Poland and his spouse, on board. In Smoleńsk, there was a mist. The visibility did not qualify as landing conditions. The terrain ahead could not be seen. The pilots did not receive the information from the airport control tower concerning a departure from the landing line. The plane underwent a crash. Its parts were to be found over a vast area. From the data we have been given, there was a high representative of the Polish Armed Forces Command in the pilot's cabin. 96 people died. The plane from Poland carrying journalists had landed in Smoleńsk area. This is the situation. We Poles receive this situation. If we imagine Poland as a person, She would be now beheaded and dismembered. It happened at the time of peace, which is why all the 96 people were flying to Russia in one plane, in trust. Poland was not at war with any other country. She was allied with the NATO. The High Representative of the Polish Armed Forces Command in the cabin was the NATO. The tower was Russia. The journalists were in Russia. The mist, when they landed, was not as bad as it was when the elite were landing. The mist did not only cover the terrain ahead, it also covered the sky. The plane was in the Russian space. There came warning about the departure from the landing line, neither from the Russian tower nor from the NATO. The event must have had a high importance ranking. It was known the President would address the war crime under the heading cutting, genocide, international significance. It must have been watched closely. Poland had a high NATO ranking. Radek Sikorski had been a candidate for the head of the NATO. The crash in Russia should have been received as a declaration of war between Russia and the NATO. We learned the American satellites were not recording the events in the Russian space. The public do not know if other NATO allies were. Perhaps I should correct it. The information we have is the American satellites were not recording the events in the Russian space. The public do not know if other NATO allies were. We receive no records from the tower. This is the end of Part 1, Situation. Part 2, Questions. What happened? Who did it? What for? From the answers, there should follow a sequence of events with authorship, leading to a specific result, which constitutes the motivation. What it should have been like. 1. The tower informs the cabin that they have departed from the landing line and corrects the course or the flight, the line of flight. 2. The pilots correct their course or the line of flying. 3. The plane lands in Smoleńsk. The tower motivation is the duty of the tower to guide the plane to the point of safe landing. The pilot's motivation is to fly the plane to the point of safe landing. What happened? The plane departed from the landing line. Who did it? What for? Did someone do it? Or does it happen sometimes? What happened? The tower saw a safe assumption based on the technical knowledge. The plane departing from the landing line and did not correct it. Who did it? What for? What happened? Anyone else saw the plane departing from the landing line and did not correct it? Who did it? What for? It is but the beginning. All sequences must be located. These are basic questions about the event. The list will be long. Still, these are basic. Then there are additional questions. Who else was taking part in it? There was a high representative of the Russian armed forces in the tower. I have taken a minute perspective of the moment when someone perceives the plane departing from the landing line. The actions following the event are valid information. It might be that at one point the investigation will arrive at a shocking scene like the hypothetical one I have outlined, including the 4 key components. A. The one that commits a crime. X, Y, Z. The ones against whom the crime is committed. The result, A. The motivation, A. Where optimally the result should be the same as the motivation. For instance, the plane was targeted by a magnetic wave that damaged some of its protection by an American plane checking if the Russian planes can be deprived of such a protection, and to what degree. The result was achieved as soon as the protection was gone and further points of reconnaissance could be cleared up. There were no other parties involved. The first sequence. A. The American plane, in inverted commas. Who is the American plane? The one that commits the crime. XYZ. The Polish dignitaries on board. The ones against whom the crime is committed. The result A. Reconnaissance. Yes, the Russian planes can be deprived of the protection completely. The motivation A. Reconnaissance. Can the Russian planes be deprived of the protection? To what degree? The second sequence. The plane underwent the anonymous attack through which the controlling devices were synchronized with the action center, and all parameters were checked with the prospect of possible takeovers of these kind of planes in future. They had their men in the security group checking the plane fitness for military flights. B. The anonymous. The security groupman as an accomplice. The one that commits the crime. XYZ. The Polish dignitaries on board. The ones against whom the crime is committed. The result B. Synchronization of the controlling devices for future takeovers. The motivation. Synchronization of the controlling devices for future takeovers. The analysis pattern is A commits a crime against XYZ aiming at the result A from the motivation A. B commits a crime against XYZ aiming at the result B from the motivation B. C commits a crime, and so on. I'm working on hypothetical events with no access to data. It is an outline for the analysis of the investigation data. Attention. 1. It can be the anonymous were targeting a different XYZ, even if the Polish dignitaries are the victims of the crime. Who else uses such players? 2. This is not the accomplice that is the author of the crime, not the security groupman, but the anonymous. It is just the beginning, but we already have 3 huge segments of data. The situation, no interpretation in the outline, analysis afterward. The minute perspective of the departure notice, what happened, who did it, what for. The actual perspective of the crime. A commits a crime against XYZ aiming at the result A from the motivation A. B commits a crime against XYZ aiming at the result B from the motivation B. C commits a crime against XYZ aiming at the result C from the motivation C. D commits a crime against XYZ aiming at the result D from the motivation D. A further point must be made about the XYZ. Excuse me. X might have been targeted. Y might have been targeted. Z might have been targeted. Or any combination that the group encompasses or represents. So encompasses is the someone within, and represent is the someone without or outside. All sequences must be listed in simple arrangements. There are further questions. What are the obvious results of the Smoleńsk Catastrophe? List all. What are other results of the Smoleńsk Catastrophe? List all. What is the real meaning of the result A? What are other meanings of the result A? What is the real meaning of the result B? What are other meanings of the result B? What? 1. Assume the people behind the different sequences do not know about each other. 2. Check if any do. What is the purpose of the investigation? To arrive at the truth. To find out who is guilty and what each person's guilt consists in. To define and undertake safety measures for future. These are primary. Why is the truth important? If the A is filled in with the innocent becomes the enemy to the XYZ, where there was friendship or neutrality, and the real enemy remains free to commit further crimes against XYZ or anyone else. In case of a state, the state guilty of a crime against the XYZ state as the A can become an ally against the innocent party and continue criminality against the XYZ as an ally. One correct sequence only leaves the B guilty of the crime out of consideration. The consequences analogous to the above. The obvious A can be a cover for the B. No safety measures against the guilty B. Possible cooperation between the A and the B undetected. The investigation. The obvious result of the Smoleńsk catastrophe is the investigation. The investigation means. What does it mean? For X, Y, Z, anyone else? The multi-level structure of the crime. In my speech, I have made you familiar with the idea of the multi-level structure of life as a defining characteristic of the Honestian paradigm. The multi-level thinking can be applied also in the case of the investigation at hand as a valid consideration. At that point, you ought to be able to develop the analysis from the outline. The multi-level structure of the crime would mean that the person A and the person B and the person C were addressed by a power 1, who was addressed by the power 10, who was addressed by the power 100, who was addressed by the power 1000. Again hypothetically, for instance, the power 1 is the United Nations. The United Nations was addressed by the scientist working on the Übermensch project, who was in need of elite brains. The scientist works for the power 100, who happens to run the business of finance for the power 1000. The power 1000 works for the power 1 million, who likes it when things are neat and people do not shout in the streets. For the first wind-up, we would be considering the following. Many events of the crime leading to the result A, respectively results B, C, and so on. Many independent criminals guilty of the crime. Many independent sequences leading to the crime. For instance, the plane was targeted with the magnetic wave. The plane's flight was controlled from a different computer as a game. The pilots' minds were running a NATO script of self-destruction. The Russian Air Force were giving false instructions because Stalin's offspring expect Stalin to become a positive icon of the New World Order. These are 4 different sequences happening independently, different people behind it, different results, different motivations. Broader analysis comes after the initial mapping of the basics, and it puts the situation outlined with detailed specifics concerning all sequences and consequences, the relation between the motivation and the result, in its proper context. What was happening has happened after the catastrophe. List all that may relate either directly or indirectly, plus the significant no connection still. For instance, Agnieszka Radwańska won the championship in the People's Republic of China. No connection still. What had been happening had happened before the catastrophe, as above. For instance, Agnieszka Rojek's first executive contact was Misha, the Golden Officer, the head of the Translations International Unit, or the head of International Translations Unit, Scientology, LA headquarters. No connection, still. Events related directly, for instance, the bodies were taken to a neurological hospital equipped with a modern laboratory. Events related indirectly, for instance, in 2008, there were Olympic Games in Beijing, the Georgia case. The phenomena of the last decade provide further data, which can be essential for the case. The truth, the guilty, the measures. What are the phenomena of the last decade? For instance, development of science, or change, or the change of the criminal code in Spain after it attempted to start a legal action against 6 Chinese dignitaries under the charge of genocide. Notice the obvious. For instance, the return of the communist regime people in common. Who had been working towards it? Consider the New World Order, communism with the capital in China. What alternative orders of the world orders can you think of? Any signals of some of these surfacing? For instance, a black movement, or Watch Rhythm Nation by Janet Jackson. Then disambiguation on the word black. What is a black movement? What is the black movement? Which is man. Consider important questions. What is the American system? Is the Communist Party of China a machine? What is the CEO? And other questions of the kind. The questions that bring answers applicable to the understanding of what happened on the 10th of April 2010. Specific people, the people on board, and think about their particular brains, and think about their particular histories, psychophysical, body and mind, and spiritual, the soul or the spirit, anything tradable about them. What is the Tibetan concept of the 3 kinds of bodies humans have? What are the implications? Furthermore, who can separate the spirit from the body? Finally, what result was it impossible to achieve in any other way? Postscriptum, when in writing, and it was prepared in writing originally, define the humanization in physical, mental, and spiritual terms. Why? Ladies and gentlemen, I believe the analysis acquires a totally different quality in the context of the whole speech. When you are familiar with my overall thinking, the thinking is so different from yours. So perhaps you should review it in the very context. I am certain the 10th of April 2010 is not a local business. Even if the investigation were to detail the local sequence of minor hatred stories, I believe it is one of the key points of the itinerary leading to the future we do not want to arrive at. Thank you for your attention. Agnieszka Justitia, the first of Onestia. Agnipolis, the 20th of April 2020.